And you're very welcome back to the programme. Now, last week we spotted a Facebook post by my first guest who was in the studio with me this morning. His name is Bob Hennigan. He lives in Ballina and he's travelling to talk to us because we were so impressed by this Facebook post that we really, really wanted to talk to him in studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks very much for having me, Tommy.
Now, you're from Ballina.
I am indeed.
44 years of age. You don't look it if you don't mind me saying.
I'm 45 now. I was 44 when,
okay.
when all of this sort of kicked off, I suppose. Yeah.
All right, I want to start this at the beginning because if there's any people out there this morning who are questioning themselves about the fact that they aren't able maybe to settle at anything in life for long periods of time, whether it's your job, that you keep moving jobs, whether it's the fact that you maybe have mood swings, whether it's that you can't concentrate for long periods of time. I think what Bob is about to tell us, his life story, will resonate with you and with maybe a family member that you wonder about yourself as to their kind of behaviour. I'm going to start at the beginning. You went to national school and you were grand in school, were you?
I was grand in school. I was grand in secondary school. One thing that they would have probably noticed looking back at school is that the grades earlier on in first year were A's and B's, and by the time I got to Leaving Cert, I wasn't doing quite as well. My CV since then, I suppose, will give you an indicator.
But by the way, when you were in school, Bob, were the teachers, questioning and wondering why you were doing so well initially and then sort of drifting off?
No, they would have noted that my attention wasn't great. I suppose it would have been untypical. Like then, I wouldn't have been disruptive. I would have been quite a quiet and introverted character, and that's probably why it took until the age of 44 to discover a lot of this.
Yeah, to what the problem was.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you left school. Did you get a fairly decent Leaving Cert?
I got a decent Leaving Cert. I didn't get the Leaving Cert I could have.
Yeah.
What I did, first of all, I did a year of computer programming in GMIT, or the RTC as it was then, in 1995. Then I went back to repeat my Leaving Cert. I made quite an impulsive decision to just not do that. Went back, repeated my Leaving Cert. 1997, got a better Leaving Cert. Then I went and did arts in NUIG. I did a year and a half of that and then dropped out.
Why did you drop out?
I
just lost interest. Right, okay.
I loved it at the start and lost interest, and that was a very typical trend pattern.
So after the arts, what did you do?
After the arts, I worked for a couple of years. I then did film in GMIT. I managed to get the degree there. But I never worked in the film industry after that. I went and became an archaeologist for a couple of years. I loved that, and then I kind of lost interest. Then I did my master's in screenwriting, which I never used. Then I became a chef for a few years, 2 years, 3 years. Then I ditched that and I worked in a call centre in Galway. I left that and worked as a call centre agent in Aviva. I then became a business analyst in Aviva, and then I became a product owner. And then the pandemic happened. I became a carer for my dad, but I did none of those occupations for longer than 2 or 3 years.
And because you would at the start be hugely enthusiastic,
massively enthusiastic,
and then suddenly
weekends and
everything,
yeah,
and then suddenly no, I don't like this anymore.
To give you an example, I was a call centre agent in Aviva, and I developed a really good ability to read how the systems were working. And the IT department noticed this and said, maybe you could become a software tester. I became a tester, I became a business analyst and a product owner within the space of 18 months. But one day I arrived at work and I couldn't do it anymore. I'd lost interest. And I mean, literally sitting down, looking at a screen, and it was like Greek. The only analogy I could use, Tommy, is if you like chocolate and then you eat 15 chocolate bars in an hour, you can't look at chocolate again. And that's the way my brain was working. I literally could not do the job.
So it was 1,000,000%.
And
then suddenly 0%.
Nothing. And I mean, unable to function. Yeah. It wasn't merely that, I don't like this anymore. An inability to do the job.
And even though you knew yourself that most of the jobs that you did, archaeology, film, freelance writing, business analysis, you were good at them, so you knew that it wasn't that you hadn't the ability.
Oh, absolutely, and I could pick them up. I could pick them up fairly quickly, and that was the thing. I would love them at the start. I'd be really, really interested, but I would just burn through the interest to the point where I had no interest anymore.
At all.
Yeah.
Okay, so we now fast forward to March 2021, yes. And we know pandemic hit in March 2020, so this was a year on, you were caring for your dad.
Yes.
You got into a real bout of depression.
Yeah, Dad passed away in December of 2020,
Okay.
and so like in March 2021, I was still grieving for Dad, and the world was in a pretty grim place with the lockdown. But I was thinking about the future, and that I had an opportunity at that point. I was like, I might pursue comedy. I'd done comedy since 2015. I'd run a comedy club in Galway, and with my history of like going into those various different jobs I mentioned, I thought, well, this is an opportunity to do something I really like. But when I started to do a comedy podcast, I was doing it, I was very enthusiastic about it. I was doing it for about 16 to 18 hours a day for about 3 weeks, and I was loving it. But then the same thing happened again.
You lost interest.
I lost interest. I sat down at the screen one day and I was like, I literally couldn't function. I didn't know where I was. And I became very, very down at that stage, because I was like, well, if this was my calling after all the other jobs, that's gone too. And I was feeling very down about the future. Like, you know, I didn't really have any enthusiasm for the future.
But, and was it at that stage that you said to yourself, look, I need to get this investigated?
I had a very bad weekend in March or April 2021, and I just spent the whole weekend in bed. I was literally staring at the wall. There was nothing happening. My ears were just ringing. And at one point I decided, I took a walk, and I went up. League Cemetery isn't far from my home in Ballina, and I went up, and as I said in the Facebook post, I'm a devout agnostic, but I went to visit Dad, and I said, Dad, you know, if there's anything you can do, you might do something for me. But at that point, something in my head went, you know from experience yourself, Bob, you can't help anybody who's not going to help themselves. And as I was walking away and thinking about it, I made a few decisions about what I would do. And
what were those decisions?
I decided to get a dog. I'd always wanted a dog, and I thought a dog would be a great thing to get as a focus of attention and affection, and something I could work on. I decided to go to grief counselling, which was great. But I also knew in the back of my mind there was an itch I needed to scratch around why I kept failing in occupations and tasks and projects. So I decided first and foremost to get an autism spectrum disorder assessment. It had been recommended to me years before that. That turned out negative, but out of that, I was given the referral for the ADHD assessment, which I took the assessments in December, January 2020 or 2021-22, and I was confirmed diagnosed in 2021
as having ADHD.
Yeah, the inattentive subtype.
Yeah.
It would explain why I was a introverted, quieter kind of teenager.
Guy, yeah. And had you heard of it before you were diagnosed with it?
I had heard of it, but I was kind of sceptical about it. Even when coming out of the ASD assessment, when I was referred for it, thought it was a bit wishy-washy. But then I started going on to the ADHD Ireland website, and I started going to their forums. They have group meetups, which are great, before I was diagnosed. And the more I heard of other people's behaviours, the more I recognised my own behaviours. Even the CV of like not completing projects, I didn't realise that was an ADHD trait. And there's so much more I've discovered about myself.
And do you believe that ADHD can be cured?
It can certainly be managed. And I found that myself in the last year. Various different books I've read, they say children, if it's caught early, they say it can be cured. I'd have to bow to what clinicians and psychologists are saying. But it can certainly be managed, and if you're aware of it, you develop a huge empowerment over it, knowing the way your brain works. You know, if you're starting a project and you know what the outcome could be, you're much more mindful of how to regulate what you're doing with the project. Doing it 16 hours a day is not going to be sustainable. So even armed with that knowledge, I get a lot more done, and I'm able to manage myself a lot better.
You're in the early stages of sorting your way through this ADHD diagnosis. As you say, nowadays, if you were 12 or 13 now, it would probably be detected because you would have been sent for tests and so on. I guess back in the day, these things weren't talked about enough.
Absolutely. I mean, even people who know me and my family were probably surprised by the diagnosis, because I think you just accept someone as a personality the way they are, like, quieter, and sometimes you don't get things done and that. You would hope that like people are getting assessed more, but that there is a bottleneck there in trying to get people assessed. But even like back as far as like 2007, I had a triage rather than an assessment for ADHD, and I was told I didn't have it because I wasn't a disruptive or
boisterous
character as a teenager. That was the mindset at the time. That's why I was recommended for an autism spectrum disorder assessment at that point, and that's why I took that up first and foremost when I decided to do something about it now.
And you had no difficulty academically in school in terms of learning to read and write and so on?
No, but dyslexia can be quite, and dyspraxia, which would be problems with balance and hand-eye coordination. I wouldn't have had any problems like that. But it's a wide spectrum of different behaviours, and even from talking to people on those ADHD Ireland forums, you will see that the behaviours affect each other quite differently, but it all comes back to a very much a central sort of problem or diagnosis.
Yeah. And I was looking at this last night and knowing that you were coming on today, and an awful lot of the websites tend to focus in on younger people's behavioural difficulties with ADHD as opposed to adults.
Yes. And that's the thing, if you go into ADHD Ireland, they have all of those, they have loads and loads of group Zoom meetups that you can do, but they're all tailored, they're all broken down into different groups. There's some for kids, some for teenagers, some for parents of kids, some for partners of adults with it, men and women. So they've really broken it down into all those different groups.
So what's the plan now? Now you know what it is you've had all of these years, and now that you can identify that there are mechanisms to try and help you cope with your behavioural issues, are you hopeful that the next job you take on, you'll be able to hold it down? If you like it.
Absolutely, because a lot of those jobs I see myself as having been a bit of a square peg in a round hole anyway. And a lot of people with ADHD will say that they see themselves as a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, but you weren't a square peg in a round hole with Aviva. I mean, you
I think I was. I think that's one of the jobs where I think I was.
Even though you managed to climb the ladder very quickly.
Oh yes, but I think I do think I was a square peg in a round hole there. The archaeology maybe not so much so. I think that was a more of a suitable job. But I think a lot of people will use the square peg round hole analogy if they have ADHD. But when you're diagnosed and you're empowered to do your own thing, you tend to be able to carve out a square hole for yourself rather than having to be the square peg in the round hole.
And is that what you're doing right now?
That's what I'm doing right now, and what I would like to do in 2023, I'm going to do a comedy show about ADHD. I'm going to do a work in progress for that next Thursday, the 19th, up in the Dewdrop Inn in Galway. That's where I run the regular comedy show. That's called Bob Hennigan, a work in progress, which is what I am. But I would like to become, I don't know, I use the term educator, but I would like to take the opportunity to do what I'm doing right here now, Tommy, and just talk more about it, make people more aware of it, and just talk about my own experience if it helps other people.
And I have no doubt that there are men and women listening to this interview right now who are either saying to themselves, I'm him, or my partner is him, or my partner is her, whatever the case might be, that there's probably so many undiagnosed ADHD sufferers out there.
Absolutely, and there's a bit of a sniffy attitude as well from people saying, oh, everyone's getting diagnosed. What's happened is that our understanding of the behaviours has changed, and we're starting to understand that people who mightn't have been diagnosed as children, like myself, have struggled through life and are getting diagnosed now because we understand much more about how ADHD works.
Because you're a calm character, you're probably not angry about the fact that your issue wasn't detected a lot earlier in life, or are you?
Initially, when I was diagnosed, I was euphoric at that knowing, and a couple of months later, I got very angry. But I didn't want to become the person who, you spend the first. If I lived to 88, you spend the first 44 years not knowing, and the next 44 years shaking your fist and being angry about it. That'd be an awful waste of time. I am angry about some things, but being angry is okay as long as it doesn't overcome you or overwhelm you. And I decided I'm going to use that anger if it does come along channel it, and I'll turn it into comedy, or I'll turn it into something creative that is useful for me, or that informs someone else.
Family and friends, I mean, did they not say to you, why didn't you talk to us about this earlier, and maybe we could have helped?
Yeah, and that's one of my big regrets, is that for a lot of the time I did keep it to myself. Like, for a lot of the time that I was undiagnosed with ADHD, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and I spent a fair bit of time taking antidepressants. Now, I don't blame the doctor who diagnosed me. He helped me to the best of his ability and the best of his knowledge at the time, but there's no way that I should have been taking antidepressants for the length of time that I was, when the depression and the anxiety
was
were
only
they were the side effects, or they were the secondary things coming out of ADHD. And I look back at all the times I was anxious or depressed, and I can point to the ADHD as the source.
What kind of response have you received from people since that Facebook post?
It's been absolutely overwhelming. I've had a lot of friends message me looking for referrals. They saw a lot of themselves in what I was saying. I've been able to direct them to ADHD Ireland, which is a great resource to have. There's a great book by Gabor Mate called Scattered Minds. It's one of the first and best books that lays out what ADHD is, how it affects people, and what you can do about it. And
just give me the title is Scattered Minds.
Scattered Minds
by
Gabor Mate. That's Gabor Mate. He's a Hungarian-Canadian psychologist and MD. And that book came out in 1999, but it's been updated since. It's available on Audible. I don't read because I never get through a book, so I go for the audiobooks these days, but that's an absolutely brilliant book.
Do you find now, even though you know you have ADHD, that you have to pull yourself back sometimes when you say to yourself about something, no, I'm not interested in that anymore? Do you have to then work on saying to yourself, look, I need to keep interested in this?
Yeah, one of the reasons I decided this year that I wanted to become, like I say, an educator or someone who speaks out about ADHD is because sometimes I forget I have ADHD, and I'd be trying to do way too much, or in my comfort zone not do nearly enough. And there's that sweet spot in the middle. But I think I need to get up in the morning and realise that I have ADHD, and that day I'm going to do things in that sphere, and that the things that I do from then on are related to that, and that way I'll always be able to keep a sort of an eye on what I'm doing and whether I'm doing too much or too little.
Do you worry that if a cloud was to descend on you again, that you wouldn't be able to cope?
There's no road that long that doesn't have a turn, but I found since I was diagnosed, I'm so much more self-aware of the way my emotions work, first and foremost. When things happen to me now, like I used to be a very emotional person who would make decisions in the moment. A lot of the decisions to quit jobs, go back to school, quit a college course, were like I get this peak of like disinterest or frustration and go, do you know what? Sod this, I'm off elsewhere. Whereas now I tend to stop and I go, you know what, you have ADHD, your emotions to be all over the place. Think about what you're doing now. Why are you thinking like this? And I always try and calm down and make my decisions and take my actions when I've calmed down. So in answer, a cloud will descend at some stage. But I feel I'm much better empowered to deal with that now, just knowing the way my mind works.
Yeah. There's an irony in all of this, because I was reading a book quite recently which was talking about people in the comedy business, comedians, well-known and not so well-known. And the percentage of comedians who go out on stage to make people laugh, who are suffering from depression, is huge.
Yes, and the number of them that are being diagnosed with ADHD now is just off the charts. Johnny Vegas, I think in the last day or two, came out and said that he had been diagnosed at the age of 52. Some of the facilitators in ADHD Ireland have said that almost every comedian that they've met, they reckon has ADHD. It might be the comedy interest may well be
associated in some
with
way,
it. It might be a
strange way.
trait. Yeah.
So do you write all your own gags?
I write all my own gags. I write them. I usually write when I'm out in the woods walking the dog. The brain just goes quiet a bit, and all the gags come into my head. If I was to sit down at the kitchen table and try to write, I'd write nothing. Yeah. But that's usually where I come up. That or in the car or in the shower.
Yeah. Can I read some of the comments that are coming in? Loads of them, and the one that I love the best is the shortest one. It says, this is from Richard. He called to say, Tommy, I often ring or email your programme complaining, but this morning I want to say Bob is class. So that's a nice. Declan says, delighted you guys are doing something on ADHD. It's actually hugely common. Also, it can be incredibly destructive to an individual unless it's managed properly. Depending on the type of ADHD, exercise and diet also play a huge part in managing it. He goes on to say, I was diagnosed in 2019 at the age of 43, having had it all of my life. I feel I'm lucky I have the hyperactive version of it, and I now see it as MG power, a superpower, and it has most certainly been a huge contributing factor in some of the major achievements in my life. Enjoyed that interview. Well done to Bob for bringing it to the fore. Another texter says that years ago, no word of ADHD. It was either you either went one of two ways, either an entrepreneur or a dropout. We all know of workaholics or never sit still people. Now older people realise, because their children are diagnosed with ADHD, they realise it in themselves now. Years ago, you were a bold or wild boy in class. And that's from somebody who is actually in the special needs teacher profession. Which is interesting. Yeah. But in your case, you weren't the wild boy, you were the quiet boy.
No, I was very quiet, yeah. And it was only when I was being diagnosed by my psychiatrist in 2021 that we went through some of those assessments, and he said, yeah, you live in your head, you probably... you're being introverted. I imagine your teenage brain was going 90 miles an hour, and it was the first time I looked at someone and went, yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly the way I was.
Loads more. This texter says ADHD nearly took our son 11 years ago before he was diagnosed. He suffered very bad with depression and self-harming before he was diagnosed. So, diagnosis seems to be the key here.
Absolutely. The self-awareness that diagnosis brings, and, not just self-awareness. I did courses in cognitive behavioural therapy tailored towards ADHD last summer, and another course called Acceptance and Compassion Therapy. It might sound a bit wishy-washy. I was very sceptical about it until I did it, but it was absolutely brilliant. I did that in October. But also the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that gives you clinicians and psychologists the actual definition of the symptoms of ADHD, says nothing about the emotional impact of it. And every practitioner, psychologist you meet, or that I meet now, talking about ADHD will say that's the absolutely central thing to ADHD. And all your callers or your people texting are saying the same thing. The impact it has on people on an emotional level is absolutely profound, and being diagnosed changes that for most people, and it certainly has for me.
So, as you said, instead of lamenting your first 44 years, it's a case of looking forward to the next 44.
Absolutely, because the last year of my life has been one of the best, without a shadow of a doubt.
No antidepressants?
No antidepressants. I was prescribed Ritalin at the start for ADHD, which I found effective at the start. I'm now taking less and less of that. The gold standard, even the psychiatrist at the time said, when we're putting you on this is not forever. This is at the start. The gold standard for treating ADHD is cognitive behavioural therapy, self-care, and other therapies that you can do.
Yeah, exercise, not medication.
Exercise, that is not a long-term goal, and it's never seen as that.
I am so glad you've come in this morning, Bob, to tell that story, because it's a very important story to tell, and I hope that it resonates with people, particularly who know of or themselves believe that what Bob has experienced in his life, you are experiencing in yours. and it's most likely that if you haven't had a diagnosis for ADHD, you should go and have an assessment done.
Absolutely, and if you want information on how you can do that, I would encourage people to contact ADHD Ireland. They will be able to give you information on where to go. The number of psychologists and psychiatrists who are able to take people changes, so they'll have all the up-to-date information on where you can go. And as I said, that book, Scattered Minds, is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I was actually funny enough because loads of people are asking me to repeat the title of the book. The book is called Scattered Minds. It's by Gabor Mate, spelled Gabor, and his surname Mate. Is he a psychologist or a psychologist?
He's a Canadian psychologist, and I think he was a GP and that. He has lots of different books on the subjects of ADHD and addiction and various different things, but he's very well regarded, and he has a massive following on Instagram, so you can follow him there and see regular interviews with him there. Okay,
that's Gabor, Gabor Mate, Mate, on Instagram, or Scattered Minds is the name of his book. You are not a scattered-minded person any longer, Bob Hennigan.
I will be in some ways, but
that's okay.
I'm getting it together.
That's okay too. Listen, thanks for coming in, Bob.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is
Tommy.
Bob Hennigan from Ballina joining us in studio today. Pádraig O'Hora, the Mayo footballer, is what?